Okay, today we're taking a look at the Canon R5C. This is a 1-year review using this camera. So I do want to kind of talk about how I use this camera, what I like about it. It's not going to be the most in-depth and technical video about this camera. There's tons of videos out there and tons of people that have much more knowledge and better breakdowns of all the tech specs and things like that. I'm just going to talk to you about how I use it and what I like about it. So I initially got this camera to be used in the studio as a behind-the-scenes camera for photo and video, also to do any type of videos like this, and also to bring this camera with me on vacations while I'm traveling, if I'm backpacking, if I'm hunting, doing anything out in the outdoors. I wanted a camera that had the ability to have photo and video capabilities in one body. And also separate systems in one body. And what I mean by that is the R5C actually has its own dedicated photo mode and its own dedicated video mode. And what I like about that is just with the flick of a switch, you can go into each mode. The benefit of that is for my photo settings, they're going to be a lot different than my video settings. So my shutter might be much higher. I'm not going to be shooting in Canon log in photo mode. My aspect ratio might be 4:3 instead of 16:9. And it could be a couple other details as well that are important for the photo, but not something I would necessarily use for video. So the beauty of this two-system setup is in photo mode, I can keep those settings, and then when I switch over to video, I can keep those settings separately. And I don't have to keep going into the menus and changing the color space or aspect ratio or any of those details. It really is a time saver to be able to hop back and forth and not have to be scrolling through menus, changing settings to be optimized for each system. So that's really my favorite aspect of this camera, but there's a lot of great features. So the sensor is really good for photos. I believe it's 48 megapixels. And for video, you can shoot up to 8K RAW, which is pretty incredible what you can do with this small body. Now, to be able to do that, you do need to be either powering the camera with a battery or with house power to be able to kind of use those raw 8K settings. For my use with this camera, just being a behind the scenes and getting content, I haven't actually used the 8K raw capabilities. I'd like to one day just to test out the quality and maybe use it for more kind of narrative pieces, but I haven't had a chance to do that. And the 4K video shooting in the Canon Log 3 is really, really nice. I haven't felt the need that the quality wasn't good enough. So that's really what I'm using this camera for, grabbing stills and getting behind the scenes, getting content, and then taking it on vacations, being able to take pictures and also get video. So let's talk about the form factor of this camera. Now the form factor, it does feel really good in hand, but it is a little bit bigger than some of its competitors. You know, when you look at the Sony cameras, the A7S, they are a bit smaller, and this camera is a little bit heavier, but it does feel like the build quality is a bit better. Functionality of the switches and the dials I find to be very intuitive. You can really customize each one of these buttons to what you want and how you want to use it. The flip screen is incredible, especially for video. You have the ability to pull this screen out. You can rotate it up or down. Also, if you're doing any vlogging, which I do quite a bit, you can turn it towards you and you can operate it that way. You can also spin the screen toward you and have it pushed in. A lot of functionality with this flip screen. I like it a lot. Some other really nice features that I like about this is, you know, for getting exposure, you have the ability to do waveform. You can do zebras, and you can also do false color, which I use a lot, especially when I'm shooting subjects and people, to really nail those skin tones. It's nice to have a false color. And a lot of higher end video cameras do have it, and this camera has it as well, so that's a great feature. So another thing I love about this camera is The autofocus is really good. It did take me a while to kind of fine tune the speed of the autofocusing and you know, the mode that I wanted to use it in. But once you get that dialed in, the autofocus is actually very good. And especially with some of these RF lenses, it's fast and it does a great job. One upgrade that I did to the eyepiece, the diopter here, is I went ahead and got a larger diopter. And it's about an inch, the sides are about an inch long, and it's soft cushion. And what that allows you to do is when you're taking a picture or a video, the size of that hood kind of blocks some of the sunlight. So it's a nice upgrade. I think I got this on Amazon for under $20. I'll put a link in the description of what it is, but definitely a big benefit when you're shooting in like harsh sunlight. So again, for video, I'm shooting 4K in the Canon Log 3, and I find the footage to be really nice. I do also like the slow and fast motion feature with this camera. So I can shoot 60 frames per second, slow motion, 120, all sorts of features when it comes to slow motion, which is great. And I can assign this button, I assign this button here, this rate button, to that slow and fast motion. So if I'm shooting some video and I want to quickly get a slow motion clip, I can just click that button. It jumps right into that slow motion setting and I'm good to go. Love that feature. So for photos, when I first started taking photos with this camera, I was a little unhappy with the quality and the dynamic range of the photos that I was taking. It just seems like the highlights didn't roll off that well, and the highlights were clipping much quicker than previously using Sony cameras. I felt like I had a lot more dynamic range. After doing some research, I realized that the way that Canon's dynamic range is kind of set up is there's more dynamic range in the shadows than in the highlights. So I've noticed that the highlights will clip sooner, but there's more information in the shadows. So just the way that I expose images, I have to approach it a little bit differently. With Sony's, generally I would expose like half a stop or stop over. With Canons, it's kind of the opposite. I have to either nail the exposure or be like a half a stop under. And then when I bring the photos into post, I notice that I'm able to retain a lot more information and bring back a lot of those shadows, and the highlights are exposed well. So one thing to keep in mind is Canon's dynamic range is a little bit more in the shadows as opposed to in the highlights. All right, let's talk about one thing that I don't like about this camera. One is very minor and it's not a huge deal because I'm able to make it work with different lens choices, but that would be the size. It's a little bit big for a walk-around camera, and because I also utilize this as a walk-around travel camera as well, it's a little bit bigger than I would like. I'm able to make it work. A lot of that has to do with choosing smaller lenses when I'm out traveling or walking about. It is a little bit on the bigger side. The other major issue, and this is common, I mean almost everybody who reviews this camera talks about this as being the major downside to this camera. That's the battery life. The battery life is really, really poor with this camera. I find myself, if I'm going out shooting for half a day or the entire day, I have to bring at least 4 batteries with me to kind of make it through that day if I'm shooting a lot. And it's really made me be selective with how I'm shooting, especially if I'm doing like a travel video or doing like hiking with my family and shooting video. I'm definitely very selective with what I shoot. I don't just let the video roll for minutes on end. It's kind of changed how I shoot with it a little bit, but I do wish the battery life was much better on this camera. And it doesn't help that the actual batteries that you use for this, the Canon LP batteries, are like $70. So, I mean, if they were half that price, it wouldn't be as big of a deal because you could just keep buying more. But at $70 a pop, you know, it's tough to buy 5 of those. The other thing is you can buy third-party batteries, and I do have a couple of those third-party batteries that are half that cost. But what I've noticed with those batteries is that they just don't last as long. They're just not as good. So that's kind of the only downside to this camera. Other than that, I'm really happy with it. I'm going to continue shooting with it until I find, a better option out there. But for right now, this has been a great camera. This is the Canon R5C, and this is the 1-year review.